you essay YouTubers and, let's be honest, grifters in any fandom would.
So the first thing I'm worried about is that it gives some of these YouTube grifters, these tourists that have been, visiting our fandom just to shit on some of the projects, it adds more fuel to their fire that they're trying to burn about how, American Godzilla sucks or there's only 3 Toho movies worth watching.
There are a lot of grifters around right now, and they do not care about the franchise, no matter what they say.
Grifters.
YouTube grifters, these tourists.
There are a lot of grifters.
Grifters.
Hey guys, how's it going? I probably sound a lot louder than I usually do, and that's because I got myself a little stand that allows the mic to be a little closer to my face. So as a result, I will probably sound a little better on streams. So when I move in and out, it's not going to sound as bad as it used to, where replaying some of my old streams, I could not even I could barely hear myself. So I'm happy that I got this as a late Christmas gift, as it were, or birthday gift, whatever one you want to call it. But hello, everyone in the chat. I got some new faces here. Rose Puppy, hello. Art Shade, yois, hello. And then we got some returning guests. We got Minecraft World, heyo to you too, Sea Monster Essay, and Joe Smo. What's up? Well, it's going good. Now, will this be an open stream? No. Unfortunately, this will not be an open stream. So this will be just me. And unfortunately, I'm sorry guys. I will probably plan on doing a open stream probably for the next stream. I'll make that one open, since that's a little bit more kind of slop related. Well, this is less slop. This is I want my kind of full attention, because I did leave just a tiny bit of notes, not too much. So I have a stream going on both our computers and the delay. Well, I appreciate you guys both watching, and it looks like you're both friends of Minecraft. So in that case, I appreciate you guys for coming on. And because I'm a terrible live streamer, and I forgot to unwrap the zero energy monster that I got for myself before coming home, I'm going to mute myself real quickly so you guys don't hear the unwrapping that's about to commence. There we go. Okay. Because considering how close the mic now is to my face, I bet it's just going to pick up every little thing. So I'm going to listen back to this, and probably during the stream, you're going to hear me and stuff like that. Hello to you too. Hi, is Godzilla evolved? Leaving the slop first pigs on Zim. Yes. Well, what can I say? I bring the slop, as it were. But since I said it's a monster, gotta... There we go. Awesome. Well, today's video, it's not super I didn't have any particular reason as to why I wanted to go over it or anything like that. I just personally felt like I wanted to I just wanted to talk about it. And since I'll be doing more of the Godzilla unscripted videos, I thought that this might be a topic that I'm gonna go over sooner rather than later, or more specifically talking about certain aspects of this discussion. So the origins would be one of them. But yeah, I see how it is. Yeah, I'm sorry. What can I say? We all love slop around here sometimes. Hello, Sam. How's it going? Hope it's going good for you. But I think without further ado, actually, I always like to give these videos a buffer for a couple of minutes, because there's always something bad happens whenever I don't give it a few minutes. And you know what? I'll just cover these first, but I'm just probably not going to use all the words that are used in the tweets themselves, because for anyone who is part of the Discord, one of my good friends, Vic, did he sent me not a live stream, but a post on Twitter talking about a new Japanese film that was coming out. And I was like, oh, okay. sounds interesting. But then he did send me a picture that was related to Godzilla minus one and a certain kind of descriptor, as it were, about the contents of some of these people's characters and being, some might say, a little bit of the fabulismus, fascismus type of folks. And if anyone is familiar with the last Zimcast we did about Godzilla minus one being anti-art, ironically enough, that did result in a limiting of the, as it were, suitability for advertisers and things of that nature. So I might as well just go over it now. So the big hullabaloo was about this new special film called Cocoon, based on a Josei manga about a bunch of girls who are recruited by the Imperial Japanese Army as nurses during World War II. And of course, when you have to deal with people who, anytime anything like World War II is described, you're going to have people saying the most outlandish, stupid things about, well, usually just about anything in general. But, you know, I like to be the type of person who likes to only discuss things when it's Godzilla related. And outside of obviously the controversy around this, there was also the fact that Yamazaki was doing something else that was related to just being himself and making movies, and someone took umbrage with that as well. So, as you can see me pulling these things up here, obviously there is all of this going here, which I'm not going to read because we're only 7 minutes into the video. And I think probably all of these would be like, this is not suitable for advertisers. But I think this will be fine to say, where it says Okinawans are not Japanese and are also victims of Japanese imperialism. Go hate on Godzilla minus one, an actual popular movie that glorifies Japanese nationalism. So the typical, oh, you know, Godzilla minus one says that people who were in the Japanese military shouldn't just all die and they want to live, so therefore it obviously glorifies nationalism and all the atrocities that Japan committed. Because, you know, we're smart people here, we're movie fans, as we like to say on this here channel. So the idea that this is what Godzilla minus one is about is anathema. And, you know, this is also Yamazaki, the same Yamazaki who cites GMK as one of his favorite films, and that film literally has Godzilla being raised from the dead to enact revenge on the Japanese people for forgetting the war crimes that it committed during the war. It's almost like you can talk about a subject without directly relating it to everything that could encompass that topic. So just because you're talking about Japan during World War II does not mean you're going to bring up everything to do with Japan, like Unit 731 or Nanking or things of that nature, you know? But I don't know. Maybe it's just like it's virtue signaling at this point, just to be like, hey guys, you know, I'm really part of this in group and I love it so much. But the other one, which was J.J. Abrams, which I think that's person Yamazaki was working with on this. So J.J. Abrams and Yamazaki Joint is going to have the most. I'm not even going to say that, even though it's not even the right word, but I think they might even pick up on that on the YouTubes because I'm not even 10 minutes in. But the most so-and-so politics of any film, and then I'm not even going to try to pronounce that right there. But, you know, everyone just wants to get their crumb of fame and their crumb of dunking on quote-unquote bad takes or bad people. But, you know, there's nothing more pathetic than these people who really don't know anything about the franchise, which I'm like half happy that I used the grifter intro that I did use, but then I'm also like, it doesn't really relate super well to the video we're about to cover. But, you know, that's what happens when you kind of get news and stuff and ads to it. Yeah, the movie with the character critiquing the government is pro-Japanese government. You know, it makes total sense. I know I made the joke about it earlier, but minus one is critique makes my blood boil as much as caught him is pro-nuclear. Yeah, no, because I think that the minus one criticism is more damning because of the hubbub that people make about that word and about people being that word versus the pro-nuclear argument, which is so blatantly false that like it can be debunked in less than 5 seconds. But we have crossed the threshold for the video. And let's get into that. Streamception for a hot second. And we're doing a little it's a Max Allo video. Now, we covered Max Allo before on the trial of Black Rooney, where 2 people really wanted to slap his nuts over the inversatility of Godzilla. So this one is about Godzilla -1 versus Shin Godzilla, which is more faithful. Now, I went through it the first time, and there's a few things that I was super confused by. And then I thought about it more, and I'm like, seems like it'd be something interesting to discuss. So why not? Let's get into it. And since this is a pretty long video, we won't do YouTubers on speed too much. We'll do 1.5 times speed only because he talks a little slow for my liking. Who could survive an Evangelion, Godzilla, Ultimate Shin Godzilla, or Godzilla's one revision of all 3, or Load to help us? Ultima would obviously survive. Shin, definitely not. -1, maybe. I assume, Black, you covered his video that was a response to your video, because this is a very new video.
Godzilla -1 and Shin Godzilla, Toho's 2 most recent Godzilla movies, and the fact that Shin Godzilla is almost 10 years old is legitimately terrifying to me. Taking a bit of a break.
I know I don't want to be nitpicky about it. But technically the anime films come after Shin, so technically Shin and -1 aren't the newest releases, but I know what he means. That's just me being exceptionally nitpicky in the first couple of seconds. So I know he definitely probably means the newest live action Godzilla movies and doesn't want to include the anime films because he considers them their own little category. But
from the Monsterverse, no thanks to last week's video getting copyright stricken for some stupid reason, it falls under fair use. In like half the clips it's hitting aren't even from Godzilla vs. Kong. But happy thoughts, giant atomic dinosaurs. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Japan's variants of Godzilla, not talking about Monsterverse this week. I know, a bit of a strange thing, considering that's basically all we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. And this is going to be a comparison between Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1's individual representations of the King of the Monsters, compared to the original, and see which one is more faithful, which one is more accurate, and see which of these 2 titans did it better. We're not going to be comparing the 2 movies to one another. Godzilla -1 has much better writing, better pacing, more action, better use of shock and horror value. Godzilla just having much more spectacular fights and battles against the military. In my opinion, a much better design, as well as simply being the most recent film of the 2 of them. Heck, even compared to Godzilla Kong the New Empire, which came out a couple of months prior to that. Where, again, Shin Godzilla is almost 10 years old next year.
Well, he says he's not comparing the 2, but by the virtue of seeing which one is more faithful to the original, that would, by its very nature, be comparing the 2. Have you considered doing another stream about Congo Fiber or so many of the videos of people praise the film, such as Adam Noyes of AN Productions? He's a huge Congo 5 fan. Sorry for the spelling. No, you're good. Yeah, I wouldn't mind going over his video. I like his video. I would have to probably go through it again to see what I'd want to criticize from his video, because I understand why he likes the film. The more I see -1's animation, more bothers me, and I hate the brand maybe or because now I can't unsee it. Well, this is why I do things to Braden, because then you don't have to, you can see it and still like it. That's what I say to Braden. That's what I say.
One of these movies came out right at the very beginning of the King of the Monsters' rise to prominence once again in the world, whereas the other pushed Godzilla to the zenith of his popularity and solidified Godzilla's return. As absolutely spectacular and fantastic as -1 is, I do think it's a bit of an overrated film. There are a couple of problems with the movie that people don't seem to want to address, largely because when people really like something, they want to get overprotective of it. We kind of live in a time and place where you can't really be critical of something you love because people think that you don't actually like it. And because people regularly say that this movie is absolutely perfect, everyone's kind of afraid to actually give it criticism. And which one of these two very different movies captures the original nature of Godzilla as he was? Since we are comparing both of these to the original, I think it's only natural that we start with the original Godzilla. Who was he and what was his character? What was his origin? Well, we never did get to see this in the actual film. It was presented in the theater program, which is something that apparently Japan did in movie theaters, where it's essentially a little pamphlet containing more elaboration, more information on the movie itself. It's just not something that we really do here. Despite the fact that this really should have actually been in the movie itself, and is one of the several reasons I don't think the original is perfect, it is all still canonical information. The original Godzilla pre his mutation was simply a dinosaur-like aquatic species of reptile living around Odo Island, and
Well, that is said in the film. Because they call him Godzilla according to the legend of Odo Island, and they hypothesize in the diet building meeting with Yamane that is what Godzilla is.
and also Bikini Atoll, that, upon the nuclear detonations for the Castle Bravo tests, exterminated almost all but one of these pre-mutation Godzillas. The reason why is, as we have seen in later movies, more than one survived, but as is presented in the original movie, there was only one.
So, I know he says this comes from a theater pamphlet, but I know that if you go to, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, like this famous picture of the other Godzillas being eradicated, and most people know the backstory of him comes from this book here, the definitive edition Godzilla Introduction, which came out in '84. And in terms of origins, yeah, I've never really seen anywhere cite a theater pamphlet as explaining this. Yeah. Because Yamane proposed the idea that Godzilla lived with others of his kind, which we do see. And then, of course, Tomiyuki Tanaka expounds on this in this book here, but that book obviously was released in '84. It's very possible that Tanaka had these ideas at the time, but I've never really seen any like pre or 54 era material stating this at all. Do you think there would be a second season because of point? Maybe. Maybe not. It's the project we singled along the way.
Horribly mutilated and scarred from this nuclear devastation, he was now a changed creature, confused, and having witnessed both the destruction of his home and the death of everyone and everything he knew, it is no surprise he went on a bit of a warpath rampage across everything. Though it should also be noted that this is not simply directed rage, wrathful intent towards humanity as a whole. It is wrathful confusion. He didn't know what this giant ball of burning light was. His wrath and rage simply being inflicted on everyone and everything in his path. This is because the original Godzilla is not simply a destroyer. While he is essentially a force of nature incarnate, a slow-motion nuclear detonation, he is just as much the victim as he is the destroyer.
So, this is a weird take that Allo has and has continued to expound since my first conversation with him. And it's the idea that Godzilla 54 was this confused animal that really was lashing out because it really didn't know better. And I think the only reason why he comes to this conclusion is the idea that because Godzilla's not directing his rage at like the Americans for mutating him, he is directing his anger at the Japanese. The problem with this take is that when looking at other variations of the story where there is more descriptions and more intents behind those descriptions, so you're not interpreting what you're seeing on screen, Godzilla is very much aware of his actions and is not confused at all into what he's doing. He's very willfully destroying what it is that he touches and what he does, and goes out of his way to try to kill people on several occasions, both the original Godzilla and the second Godzilla. And what's good, Brandon? Good to see you, man. But for anyone who is listening at home and does have this book, I would like you to pull out your copy of Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again. So this is the novels that were translated by Jeffrey Engels and were made by Shigeru Kayama, who is one of the minds behind the first Godzilla and the second Godzilla stories, along with Honda and Tanaka. But in the first time Godzilla appears, although in the book there is some differences to it, if you go to page 44, it says, Emiko ran for her life. Her foot caught on a tree root and she stumbled. Help. Godzilla saw her and opened his mouth. Her life was in danger. Shrinking up in a ball and not moving wasn't an option, but she also found herself unable to make a sound. Godzilla's face got closer and closer. So in this scene right here, it's similar to the actual scene in the film where Godzilla peers over, the people start to move, Emiko trips, and then Godzilla roars at her. The added context just being that Godzilla was directly going out of his way to try to kill someone, but then decides to retreat. And if you go to page 73, this is the scene with the locomotive car. So the tail of the locomotive flew into the air like a giant serpent, lifting its tail, and a moment later it collapsed, slamming back to the ground in a gigantic cloud of dust and dirt. Roar. The enraged monster grabbed the train, which was now lying on its side, and crunch, bit down upon it, then crush, crash. He shook it back and forth with the force of his enormous body. The back cars of the train, groaning, and were thrown all the way to the water's edge. So that's another instance where you see Godzilla is not as, instead of just sort of rummaging around, it doesn't really know what's going on, is very much in control of his actions and with direct intent trying to destroy things. And another example being page 86. And this is specifically when Godzilla decides to is coming out of Tokyo Bay again for that second time. And Godzilla shook his head, lifted his tail, with bloodshot eyes fixed on the defense forces. He began to flail wildly. So you could argue that that's kind of confused, but not really. And again, Godzilla's already appeared once, so he has intention to appear again and strike again. And another line right here, Godzilla was enraged, and with each violent, angry breath, he set a cloud of dirt flying into the air. Opening his mouth wide, he looked around. Again, all you see in the book is Godzilla continually acting in a way that is aggressive, angry, but not in any way, shape, or form confused. And then another shot too, and I think this is relevant as well, is that Godzilla, both the 54 and -1, both decide to make a trek similar to how they do, in the sense that both Godzilla 54 and minus head towards Ginza, as in page 88. Godzilla grew even more in range. He spat out another strong, white-hot beam as he pushed forward, trampling every building in his path. He was heading towards the Ginza. So there's that, but the argument could be made, well, we don't have it. He could be confused. They don't directly say that Godzilla was confused. And I would argue that Godzilla is definitely shown when he is confused to actually make it known to the reader that he is confused. As if you go to page 90, standing in the middle of the intersection, Godzilla raised the upper part of his body and looked around with a sharp light in his eyes. The clock tower on the top of the building on the other side of the street began to chime like usual. Ding, dong, ding, dong. It sounded clear and refreshing in all the chaos. Godzilla made a confused face as he looked at it and let out a single sharp roar, then crush. He suddenly grabbed hold of it. So there is, without a doubt, a distinction between when Godzilla is confused or acting in a confused state versus when Godzilla is acting aggressively and acting angry. And in the majority of Godzilla's scenes, he is shown to be just directly angry or go out of his way to specifically kill people because he wants to. And one of the final moments that you see of this is at the end when they've used the Oxygen Destroyer, and this is on page 109. So let me find my place. In the maelstrom of bubbles rising from the destroyer, Godzilla writhed in distress. Each time he started to topple over, he managed somehow to get up again. And you could say Godzilla's in a combobulated state, but not really. Again, he's not really confused. He's just angry because later down, lower to the page, Godzilla's anguish-filled face appeared at the surface, spraying everyone. Summoning up what remained of his last strength, he was trying to attack the Seagull being the ship that our main characters are on. So, at least in the first novelization of the movie, you do see that Godzilla goes out of his way to kill people, not because he's confused, but because he's just angry, and that has nothing to do with him being confused over what has happened. And the second Godzilla is not much more different, because if you go to Godzilla Raids again, and this is on, we'll start on page 21. In their spot far below between the rocks, Tsukioka and Kobayashi must have looked like little dolls of Godzilla. He was going to grab the two of them and pull them out of their hiding spot in the crevasse. His giant hand, which looks like that of a wild beast, tried to work its way into the fissure, but fortunately, the space between the rocks was too small. Godzilla struggled in vain, unable to reach them. So, again, Godzilla definitely goes out of his way to try to kill people, and the second Godzilla does this as well. And even going further down the page, they frantically tried to escape the avalanche of rocks, but that only made Godzilla's eyes glitter with an even more berserk look. And you could say that berserk is like a mindless type of rage, but that still wouldn't make either the first or second Godzilla in any way, shape, or form confused, or essentially more victimized than most people assume. And what is the main crux of Alos points later on in the video. What are your thoughts on Toho not wanting to have Godzilla species anymore? I think Godzilla is fine being a singular individual, and singular individuals being mutated to become the next Godzilla. I think there's nothing wrong with that, and him not being a species.
The end of the original movie even acknowledging this, that Godzilla was created by humanity, and if humanity continues to utilize nuclear weapons, we will only end up creating another Godzilla. It's a cautionary tale of the nature of superweapons and the danger they bring, further symbolized by the Ocean Destroyer, what ultimately ends Godzilla being itself a superweapon humanity unleashes to counter Godzilla, the hydrogen bomb, itself a superweapon. This endless cycle of perpetuating destruction that is ultimately futile and will lead to our own oblivion. He is a tragic and sympathetic character, which, going back to the original video we put on this channel, the opening line, a good Godzilla is one that you should be as sympathetic towards as you're terrified of. Before we get on to the rest of the video comparing Shin Goji to minus Goji, please don't forget to subscribe for more. Comment your thoughts below. Which of these two titans of destruction do you believe is the more faithful to the original, and why? As while they are both Godzillas, they are very different characters. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe for more, leave a like, and if you want to, become a member. It helps support us in making videos like this, and members do get priority when it comes to suggesting video ideas. I think we should start with minus Goji when it comes to going over our two leading men, or two leading monsters for this video. Much like the original Godzilla, minus Goji hails from Odo Island. Living in the waters around it, especially in deep oceans, he has this symbiotic relationship with the native islanders, him coming up to the surface in his premutation form, which actually resembles something not that dissimilar from Rexy from Jurassic Park, just with the giant dorsal spine and a much more humped back, would bring up many deep-sea fish that the local islanders would go out, collect, and use to make hot pot, showing that this Godzilla was well aware of humanity and didn't really seem to mind their presence. However, unfortunately, none of this is really shown in the film itself. In fact, all of this actually comes from the novelization. The most we get in the movie is really just a mention that Godzilla exists from one of the aircraft repairmen on the island, and really no elaboration. And as there was no theater program, this does kind of leave a little bit of a void in how Godzilla was before the mutation occurred. We do get to see the actual mutation, which we never got to see in the original, simply him sleeping under the Castle Bravo nuclear test site, and the explosion scarring and mutilating his body. It is unknown if there are other members of this Godzillasaurus species, but what is known is that Godzilla did possess his natural healing regenerative capabilities, as it is what allowed him to survive the nuclear blast. Following this, his physiology changed very greatly, going from this hunched over classic dinosaur posture to the tried and true upright posture we know from the King of the Monsters. Before his mutation, he...
What? Oh, wonderful. There is an ad, but the one problem I also have with this analysis here is the fact that we don't really get any elaborations on, because we do get enough elaborations on in both cases where both minus and 54 both benefits the inhabitants of Odo Island because of their effect on fish, where at least in 54's case, it's actually a lot more overtly negative, as that's why they have to do the sacrifice, even though that's lost to time. Whereas in -1, Godzilla is a little bit more passive, and as a result, they're able to get fish. But in both cases, both Godzillas are mutated by the same bomb. So that should definitely, without a doubt, give 1 point towards minus being more faithful than Shin.
He was a bit territorial, shown by quite aggressively attacking lookout towers of the aircraft repair crew, and going over to investigate them after destroying said tower. It is also not shown what disturbed Godzilla to actually drive him to the surface to go and investigate this, as the aircraft repair crew had been there for quite a while. This shows that he is territorial, and a few of his actions here seem a little bit contradictory. One is the aggressiveness which he attacks the lookout tower after simply shining a light on him, and then allowing Shikishima to actually bail out of the plane before destroying the plane. Though it is worth noting he only further eviscerates the rest of the crew after the first shot is fired at his nose, suggesting that while he is territorial and potentially slightly inquisitive, he has a bit of a hair-trigger temper that anything can set him off. Post his mutation,
That kind of makes no sense. And if anything, based on Alo's characterization of the 54 Godzilla, this would make Minus very accurate to the original, because in the case of Minus and 54, both of them would be appeased if whatever was bothering them allowed them to be sated, where in the case of 54 it's the sacrifice, or at least we can assume it's the sacrifice, where with Minus, once the light that's on his face kind of dissipates, Minus essentially calms down, and if anything acts more like the confused animal that Alo says the 54 Godzilla is post mutation. So that'll be another point in favor of Minus keeping far closer to the characterization and idea of the first Godzilla.
His aggression has come far more to the forefront. There is no confusion behind the eyes of this one, going after any ship he can find, American ships, Japanese fishing ships, and expanding his territory, violently and aggressively destroying.
That's also what 54 did too, because Echo and Bingo Mario both were sunk, and there's also the party ship that gets sunk for no reason. There was no need for Godzilla to sink either of those, and also, again, no reason for him to directly come on land and attack Japan like Minus does.
Destroying all in his path. He's also shown to be able to recognize the difference between varying threat levels of different craft, after all, ignoring the small boat Shikishima and the others are in, to instead attack the heavy cruiser Takeo. When his typical brute force attack tactics don't work, he instead opts for the first deployment of his atomic ray, vaporizing the entire ship from below after being quite stunned from the heavy cannons. Further worth noting, the detonation from Godzilla's atomic ray in this movie, while previous Godzillas have had atomic rays that cause miniature explosions on impact, this one is far more in line with a true miniaturized nuclear explosion that Godzilla was once again at ground zero of. In fact, his body is shown smoldering and burning after the usage of this. He doesn't seem to care that this inflicts the exact same pain and suffering he endured the first time, which prompted him to become this way. This comes far more into focus with his attack on Ginza. Where the original Godzilla displayed an almost curious fascination with the clock tower, Minus Goji instead opts for rather deliberate destruction. He is aware of the frightened humans running away and relishes crushing them underfoot, smashing building after building.
I think that's presumptuous, considering the fact that Godzilla in 54 went out of his way to step on the train and then lift it up in the air, then throw it, and him attacking the cop car with his atomic breath, or literally seeing people fleeing underneath Godzilla's feet in the first film as well. So there's plenty of scenes in both films to show Godzilla going out of his way to destroy buildings as well as attack people directly.
After the tanks fire on him and he uses atomic ray to once again devastate all of Ginza with another nuclear explosion, he takes the time to admire the mushroom cloud in the carnage before roaring in triumph. With his final attack on the Japanese people at the end of the movie, the boat that was attempting to lure him with a speaker blasting his own roar, attempting to imitate a rival entering his territory to draw him away, Godzilla does not destroy the fleet of ships doing this immediately. Rather, he simply grabs the boat and throws it inland.
Another thing, too, to consider is the fact that in 54, we have two Godzilla attacks on the mainland. We have the first engagement, then the second one when Japan's defenses are ready. The Ginza attack, since we don't have two prolonged land engagements with Godzilla, where we only have the one main one in Ginza, and then Godzilla's lured back out to sea with the second time he ends up on land. A lot of Godzilla's actions are a mix of those two attacks, because you have the train scene from -1, which emulates the first time Godzilla makes landfall, and then you have the clock tower and the reporter deaths, which are from the second attack in 54, which are part of that same attack in -1. So again, it's very close indeed in -1's favor.
Meant deliberately to terrify the people who are attempting to move against him. A fairly impressive and very intelligent intimidation tactic, showing that he possesses rather advanced forms of planning and intelligence, further shown after the Freon tanks are deployed to inflate and drag him back up to the surface to cause the barotrauma. He is able to cut and bite through these, understanding that he needs time to decompress and recompress when either going to the depths or coming up from them. However, this Godzilla is ultimately done in by a tunnel vision on his wrath. With his body having been partially torn apart by the barotrauma, some of the atomic energy from charging up his atomic ray once again is actually leaking out of his body. He can't contain it well enough that he's no longer stable. His fixation on his wrath and his destruction, rather than actually being rather instinctive and simply fleeing from pain and living to fight another day and regenerate, which would have allowed him to survive this encounter, instead overwhelms him, charging up for a final blast, which ultimately is what causes his end. It's not a single final blow that takes him out. It is a end of 1,000 paper cuts. Yes, Shikishima's kamikaze piloting into Godzilla's mouth and detonation is what destroys Godzilla's head. However, it is because of the barotrauma weakening his body and the condensed, gathered atomic energy he had been charging up leaking out of his body that causes him to fall apart piece by piece. Now, as for Shin Godzilla, we never get an really exact origin for what Shin was. Apparently, there actually was a theater program for Shin Godzilla. What was in it? I literally can't find anything about it. But as for Shin Godzilla's origins, we actually don't really know all that much about it. It's actually, in a way, somewhat similar to -1, where it's not really gone into all that much. The most we ever get about it is Goromaki, someone who's actually from Odo Island, a nice little callback to the original, actually discovered a prehistoric organism in the water in Tokyo Bay that was apparently feeding on some of the nuclear radiation, nuclear waste that was left in the bay before his untimely end. And that is all we ever get on it. Just, it is something this guy found, and it apparently feeds on nuclear waste. What it was originally, we never find out. However, his notes left behind gave the creature its name. Godzilla, or Gojira, when it came to the Odo Islanders, meant incarnation of God. So this is the explanation for the name of the character. Unlike every other depiction of Godzilla, this is actually a rapidly mutating organism. Its first form we never actually get to see all that much. In fact, all we get to see of it is its tail, and then it has this sickly pale yellow coloration to its body.
I think also this would directly, if we're talking purely when it comes to like origins, in this case, Minus definitely loses out to no, Minus definitely wins against Shin in this case, because in Shin's case, you have it feeding on nuclear waste, which ends up mutating it and then having to evolve into a similar Godzilla form, whereas Minus goes from prehistoric creature that looks vaguely like a dinosaur to then be mutated by the bombs itself.
The closest we've ever actually gotten to being able to picture this is Godzilla Battle Spirit's card form of it. However, it really doesn't matter, since it shows itself to be a rapidly mutating creature in response to external stimuli. The first form we get to see is actually its second form, Kamata-kun, as it is more commonly known, something which somewhat vaguely evokes Godzilla, though.
More ads, and I don't need I don't need a dependable Chevy, unfortunately. But when it comes to this idea that actually, this is something I want to discuss in a Godzilla Unscripted video when it comes to origins. I think that Shin's origins are fine, and what he ends up doing, which is going from a semi-Godzilla state into a more recognizable state, I think is also fine in comparison to some other Godzilla origins, cough cough 98, for example. And I'll explain those in further detail. But ultimately, the main thing that's important is that when you were dealing with Godzilla and his origins, getting from point A to point B and starting with, I think what is most important is that Godzilla needs to be a prehistoric creature that is mutated into the modern day, because the idea of nuclear energy and the fears of it come from this idea that we are unleashing a new horror onto the world, but also untold other horrors. And Godzilla's whole purpose, being a prehistoric creature, allows you to have this idea that there's a lot of things we don't actually know about the world. Godzilla's survival due to radiation protection is one of them, but also the fact that nature is a lot older than the concept of civilization, and as a result, if there's anything that's going to rise and sort of combat humanity in all of its sense, it is going to be something from our past rather than something from the present or something evolving alongside humanity becoming what we fear, which is Godzilla, which is why I take umbrage with, for example, the anime trilogy's history as well as 98's.
So again, with the much more sickly, lighter colored skin, no arms, and basically walking horizontally, dragging itself across the ground. He doesn't really have any larger overriding goals, simply just panic and moving forward instinctively. as it doesn't get out of the way, it doesn't intentionally destroy any buildings. In fact, it basically almost slithers over a building when it gets in its way, just pushing itself forward. It only walks in the middle of streets simply because it's the path of least resistance. In fact, we actually get to see this extreme panic on display firsthand after mutating into his third form and immediately making a beeline straight for the ocean, running through buildings at a much faster speed than we've ever seen him move before. This is because in the movie, it is mentioned that his nuclear reaction needs cooling, and he has not adapted to being outside of the water, likely indicating that he was in extreme and severe pain the entire time he was moving. Now, the next we see of Godzilla, he is actually mutated into his fourth form. Continuing his general passivity, he doesn't really interact with any time the JSDF bombard him with missiles and tank shells. It's not really known why he actually returns to land, possibly just continuing exploring out of curiosity, or simply continued aimless wandering after he was no longer in as severe pain as he was before. The first time he ever notices or reacts to humanity's presence is when the US B-2 bombers drop massive cluster bombs on him. As before everything else simply bounced off his body, these massive ordnance penetrators slammed into him so forcefully, they pierced his armored skin and detonated inside of his body. The pain from this detonation causing Shin to become more enraged and to lash out instinctively.
This would also make him not in line with the original Godzilla, since neither the Ekomaru or the Bengumaru did anything directly to attack Godzilla. So there's that. Same thing with the Pleasure Cruise. And Godzilla came to land and did destroy things that weren't directly attacking him, and did so throughout his second rampage.
This is actually where Shin's atomic ray comes into being able to be used. The first slicing the B-2 in half, and then his dorsal spines emitting a massive cluster of these beams, destroying the other two and their ordnance that they were going to drop. Even when utilizing this beam for the first time, Godzilla doesn't seem to actually be able to control it, just basically whipping the beam around over and over again, slicing into buildings and destroying them. In fact, the only reason he stops is because he is running out of fissionable power, as demonstrated when the purple focused beam reverts back into the thermal flame before stopping completely, and causing Godzilla to have to shut down for nearly 2 weeks and hibernate.
Which one has stiffer movement, Shin or Minus? I think probably stiffer would be Shin. Stilted would go to Minus, since Minus is more like a step, stomp. Whereas with Shin, it's more like a trudging, slow, like looming forward, which I'd say is more. I would say if I was to define what stiff means, Shin would be more stiff than -1.
Hibernates to rebuild his nuclear power. The only other time Godzilla really seems to acknowledge humanity is actually after this, when trains loaded down with highly concussive detonative materials strike Godzilla in the legs.
Well, there's also the drones that they sent in, which Godzilla used his defense array to destroy. So he was actually responding to things before humanity like directly attacked him again.
This wakes him up from his nuclear power nap, and the bombardment of drones causing him to expend mass quantities of his energy, once again, depleting him of the power he had spent all of this time at building up. But he expresses no interest in actively destroying buildings. In fact, it's actually capitalized by detonating buildings to cause them to collapse on top of him and pin him to the ground. Being able to trap Godzilla and make him unable to move for a long enough period of time allows them to finish the plan to fill Godzilla with enough blood coagulant to cause a reactor scram. This causes his entire body to freeze over and immobilizing him completely by shutting down the nuclear power source internally to prevent overheating and melting down, and once his nuclear fuel source, which the half-life of the isotope within his body only lasting for about 20 days, eventually he would simply run out of power and cease to be. In a strange way, Shin is almost the complete antithesis of Minus Goji. One is an active hunter of humanity, while the other is actually a much more passive and confused creature. Minus Goji being a lot more focused in comparison again to this one's confusion. As it really stands, neither of these really seem to have a whole lot in common with the original Godzilla.
That makes literally no sense at all.
Each of these two carry certain elements from the original Godzilla, Minus Goji carrying the Odo Islanders actually having some of a connection to Godzilla, and being horribly scarred and mutilated by the Castle Bravo nuclear tests, and the rampage resulting from that being caused by the destruction he experienced. However, he is portrayed less like a force of nature, which is what the original Godzilla was, and more as simply a generic monster.
What does that even mean? What does that literally mean by a generic monster, which I think he'll explain right here?
Is not what the original Godzilla was meant to be. He essentially existed above the concept of human morality of...
Nope, he does not. So yeah, the idea that Godzilla -1 is just a generic monster makes literally no sense, as like with 54, both -1 and 54 are the result of nuclear testing. The only difference between the two is that 54 directly tackles the idea of the dangers of nuclear weapons, whereas -1 doesn't, and focuses on a different story with a very similar Godzilla in the backdrop. That is really the only distinctively like huge difference between the two. As in both cases, both Godzillas go out of their way to attack ships. In -1's case, we are only aware of ships that are directly military targets like US ships and the Takao, for example. And you could also say that the Shinsei Maru is a military vehicle because they were directly sent out there to fight Godzilla. Whereas in 54's case, he's just killing civilians in two cases, with the first two ships, another case with the Pleasure Cruise, and then later on in both of his first and second rampages. Whereas -1 just does it in one shot, and the only people that he kills are the volunteers on the first ships, which he throws back into the mainland.
Good and evil, simply a force of nature, a destructive force.
This is another idea that I remember he was very stuck on, which I also don't agree with either. We'll just go back to it.
A generic monster, which was not what the original Godzilla was meant to be. He essentially existed above the concept of human morality of good and evil, simply a force of nature, a destructive force, detached from that sort of morality.
That literally makes no sense because by that logic, anyone and anything can be detached from morality if you view it in a certain way. Like, if we are to say that all morality is a construct, then anyone proclaiming to be above certain ideas and concepts of morality would therefore logically be above them because they don't consider them in any way, shape, or form. The only reason why we have like morality in the way we do is because we all agree to certain rules and ideas, and as a result, that's why we're able to live in harmony. And in the case of Godzilla, if we're looking at basic cause and effects, something has been done wrong to you, therefore recompense needs to be made. Godzilla definitely would be logically in the right to be angry at humanity for killing his family and mutating him. Does that give Godzilla the right to then go and kill a bunch of other people? Because even if we're to say that Godzilla is a force of nature, Godzilla definitely has intent, and there was always intent behind Godzilla's actions, and that was rage. So Godzilla being wrathful is part of what makes him a victim because he is lashing out, but he's not lashing out randomly. He's lashing out in an incorrect manner, which is why Godzilla should be destroyed. But because Godzilla is useful in the sense that his body and what he can do in terms of survive radiation is what makes him valuable in terms of his survival. And that's why Yamane wants to keep Godzilla alive. It has nothing to do with the idea that Godzilla is above morality, because then going by this metric, Godzilla still is very much a man-made like disaster, but still an animal, a very powerful animal, but still an animal if we're to break it down completely. And as a result, Godzilla, due to his mutations and the result of mankind, would justify humanity in wiping Godzilla out because Godzilla is going out of his way to randomly kill people. And the deaths of those people are in no way justified just because Godzilla is a force of nature. I also don't like that he calls Godzilla above morality. We could say Judge Hold is above morality, but yeah, exactly. Is nature moral? That's what I want to know. Yeah, like the idea that, like, by the idea of human morality, nature is in no way, shape, or form moral. Therefore, if nature doesn't have morality, then the actions taken against nature wouldn't really have quote unquote moral consequence, but we give it moral consequence because unlike like most animals, we are able to problem solve, think ahead, and able to enact such long-term thinking that we're able to preserve things or destroy things due to our actions. And that's why we have a level of weight to the actions that we commit. Whereas Godzilla doesn't, but he does, because if there's one thing, at least Godzilla does understand the concept of rage and loss. And as a result, you would still have to argue that morally, Godzilla's actions are incorrect. And since Godzilla does not show any means of surrendering or trying to find a peace with humanity, as just because Godzilla returned to the sea in his second attack in 54 does not then mean Godzilla was never going to return again, like he had gotten his pound of flesh and was going to leave. For all intents and purposes, the use of the Oxygen Destroyer and the general justification for it is the fact that due to humanity's mistakes, a new terror that directly goes of its way to hurt people has been unleashed. And as a result, Serizawa has to then use a new weapon of mass destruction to stop the consequences of the first one, which is where the moral dilemma does come into play. And I would say that if we're going to talk about morals and ethics, Serizawa is in the right to use the Oxygen Destroyer. And I think that his moral calculations make sense as to why he burns the notes. And although I don't agree with taking your own life, I understand why he'd morally see it as a good thing to do so in order for his weapon not to proliferate like the atom bombs have. Godzilla doesn't even seem to be part of the natural order anyways. His mutation is man-made. His power is man-made. He's in a natural disaster. I would say that, yes, from that context, yes, Godzilla is in a natural disaster. But by the virtue that Godzilla is able to exist as it is and survive and subsist, he is technically part of the natural world in the sense that there is a way that nature is able to combat the effects of man-made nuclear damage and find a way to still exist. So Godzilla could still also be classed as part of the natural world in that sense. But I do understand that point, and I think it does make sense to call Godzilla an unnatural disaster, and again, would further justify Godzilla's death. And I think someone up there he is. I don't really like the analogy of Godzilla being an animal, to be honest. Yamazaki said he's always been kami-based. The thing with kami, and I'd have to do more research on this, but Godzilla being a sort of deity-like creature is true. Like, I think that more specifically, Yamazaki wanted to differentiate Godzilla's pre-mutated state with his mutated form, because that's why there's a muscle simulation for the Odo Island version where there isn't one, and it's all hand animated in his second form, because they wanted to show that Godzilla had become more divine-like through his transformation due to these atomic bombs. And when it comes to Kami as a whole, Kami being essentially nature spirits, or just spirits of different like ideas and different parts of nature, and when these parts of nature are disturbed or damaged in some sort of way, they often lash out. And that is, I think, true of Godzilla, and that's why the idea of him being a kami does make sense. Godzilla, a kami? Well, no, we're talking about kami, not kami. We don't like commies in this chat. We like commies, but not commies. But there's also an idea in Japanese religion called kegare or kigare, which talks about like it's an idea that's related to corruption. And I think that in a lot of ways, if we're to sort of expand on the idea of Godzilla being a kami, the use of nuclear weapons being weapons of war that killed mass amounts of people, not directly the actual, like, those bombs themselves, but they themselves being engines of death, would be susceptible to kegare or corruption, and Godzilla becoming what he is could be like interpreted as a result of kegare, and as a result that would still make Godzilla's death justified, because there's been an impurity that has been created in that being Godzilla. So that's like another thing where, like, no matter how you spin it, Godzilla's actions and his effect on humanity, even if it is humanity's fault, does make it so that humanity is justified in defending itself and destroying Godzilla. I prefer Godzilla to be less of a god and more of a devil. What's the point of calling him a god if he can be killed, unless we take the version of him where he's functionally a god? I think that, like, Godzilla is, if we're to call Godzilla a god, he's definitely a god in the sense of like pagan deities, like the Norse pantheon, the like ancient Canaanite gods, the like Greek, Roman pantheons, and really any other deities that you see across the world, where, unlike monotheistic religions or the ideas of certain deities being these all-powerful, all-seeing beings, the idea of these types of gods are more or less extremely powerful beings that definitely can die, but because of their power are able to have dominion over the world. Nordic Godzilla would be a Jotun. I would say, like, if anything, Nordic Godzilla would be probably closer to something like Nidhogg, which is the dragon that like bites at the roots of the world tree. And just to tie all that around, or Jormungandr, I would say I would say more Nidhogg because of the fact that Nidhogg does add to Ragnarok similar to Jormungandr does, but Godzilla is sort of a gnawing presence in the world and like the plane of humanity because of the results of humanity's actions, but also because of like his effect on us. But Godzilla is essentially the closest you could get to a completely secular chaos serpent type of myth, where in a lot of these earlier religions and ideas, you had the primordial waters and then you had chaos serpents, and these chaos serpents would oftentimes hide great knowledge or great treasure, and through their slaying, new information could be gleaned. But in a more nihilistic and secular mindset, Godzilla is still that chaos serpent, but rather instead of being a magical creature that's been here since the dawn of humanity or has like always been around because it is chaos incarnate, Godzilla is the result of evolution and is the result of like continuing to survive because of its ability to and how well adapted it is to its environment. But the secrets of being able to survive radiation are locked within Godzilla. But unfortunately, because of the fact that Japan was in a dire strait and Godzilla was made to reflect those ideas, in terms of Japan's desperation and its fear of nuclear devastation, Japan doesn't learn these secrets of how to combat radiation from Godzilla, but instead are only able to kill Godzilla in similar to the heroes of old through their magic weapons. Dr. Serizawa is able to use his oxygen destroyer to kill Godzilla, and as a result, is able to calm the waters of chaos as a result. It's because you're looking at it from a specifically Christian, but not specifically Christian, just a like monotheistic sort of lens.
Shin Godzilla somewhat has this, but Shin also doesn't really cause a lot of destruction. The most we get is the scene of him using the atomic breath for the first time and turning Tokyo into basically a sea of fire. But even then, that is a relatively short segment of the actual movie. The movie focuses far more heavily on the amount of radiation present, rather than the actual physical damage. Shin arguably goes a little bit closer to the more confused rampage of the original.
Again, he's just wrong there. Godzilla was not confused in his rampage. Godzilla very much went out of his way to destroy like buildings, people, and things near people. So the whole idea of the confused rampage is a myth.
But the original also at least had somewhat of a focus on the confused rage from the loss of his family. This one is just almost unaware of everything around him and is reacting to external painful stimulus. In fact, every interaction this Godzilla has with humanity is prompted from self-defense, while Minus Goji is a much more belligerent attacker. You
mean like 54, who went out of his way to sink the Ekomaru and Bingomaru?
Desiring the destruction of humanity for what it has suffered. In terms of physical design-wise, yeah, Minus Goji is far more faithful to the classic Godzilla silhouette, classic Godzilla design than Shin. It's bit of an oddity departure. Silhouette-wise, yes, Shin has some things in common, but even then, it's a much more grotesque and deformed version of the character. To say nothing of the various different forms it goes through, in that it actually takes a very long time to come to the classic Godzilla shape we know and love. While Minus Goji does have the very overt scene of showing the nuke in progress and his scarring and burning at the hands of humanity, it is somewhat difficult to call Shin a sympathetic character in this. After all, we see him go out of his way and enjoy the destruction of humanity. If, for example, we got a bit more scenes of, say, him going after more stiffly Americans and more so American military personnel, then one could think that he is going after those that destroyed him.
54 never did that either. Yeah, Godzilla is confused. Q scene in 54 where he directly shoots his atomic breath at people running away. Exactly.
Or at least those who mutated him to the creature he is now. That case could be made, but we only ever get to see him very deliberately targeting the Japanese people, someone who had nothing to do with what happened. This is somewhat contradictory to the original, where it is simply a confused rampage.
Again, a myth. Every time he says confused rampage, it is a myth that is not supported by the text that even he is referring to.
And the wanton destruction and bloodlust he feels makes him far more in line with a traditional villain, something actually more like Destroyer or King Ghidorah, rather than Godzilla, the original.
So if we're to use just the Ghidorah that he shows in Destroyer just is very much, if anything, slightly on the more mindless scale, in the sense of all it just wants to do is destroy things, yada yada. It doesn't even want to specifically destroy humanity. It just wants to destroy whatever's in its path, and that just so happens to be fish, and then humans, and then later on Godzilla Jr., and then Godzilla himself before later dying. Whereas with King Ghidorah is a bioweapon that has no agency really of its own, and the only like true action that Ghidorah takes of his own free will is when Ghidorah has already been kind of decapitated once by Godzilla. He goes out of his way to flee from Godzilla. So self-preservation is really the only thing on Ghidorah's mind outside of the Futurian's control, which isn't in line with -1 and isn't in line with the 54 Godzilla either.
Original, which is explicitly what they were trying to emulate. In fact, his characterization is far more similar in terms of being similar to a Godzilla to GMK, the only overtly evil Godzilla.
The only reason why people call GMK an overtly evil Godzilla is because he goes out of his way to directly kill people. The reason why GMK is the most evil Godzilla is because of the fact that he's directly attacking a specific group of people and wants to eradicate them. And even though the reasons behind why it's doing this are understandable, the proportionality is not justified. Like, it makes sense as to why the souls of those killed by the Imperial Japanese would want some kind of revenge, or at least want the people of Japan to remember what it was they did. That does not then justify Godzilla or them to raise Godzilla from the dead to then commit harm on a new generation of Japanese that had directly no influence on what has happened. Most evil goes to Ultima. I would say, yeah, if we are talking about morality in this case too, being the fact that Ultima is the extension of an eldritch being that can see beyond time and space and can see like almost everything that's happening all at once, its actions and the destruction it's causing is definitely far more overt and less justified than GMK. So yes, it would make sense to call Ultima probably the most evil Godzilla, because it is able to see everything that could happen, has happened, will happen, and still chooses to commit actions that needlessly kill people.
While on the other hand, Shin, despite lacking that very critical part of Godzilla's origin of being the last of his kind because his entire family was wiped out by the Americans testing the nukes, instead, his origin is that he was mutated by the Americans dumping nuclear waste into Tokyo Bay. Feeding on them, he was able to survive and adapt and fuel his body off of this radiation. He has essentially no grudge against humanity, which the movie actually does a very good job of showing, in that he never goes out of his way to antagonize or destroy humanity. He carries the original Godzilla's confusion, but
again, where is this confusion?
None of the wrath, and that's what makes him a bit more sympathetic. He was basically just a fish or lizard creature living in the ocean that stumbled upon some nuclear radiation and became a violently mutating, essentially cancer blob eldritch abomination. Symbolically, all three of these Godzillas connect entirely to very different things. The original Godzilla was a statement on nuclear weapons and really super weapons as a whole, the destructiveness that they bring. Shin Godzilla was actually a critique of the Japanese government's very slow response to the Fukushima nuclear disaster, something that the movie actually makes not too subtly noted towards the end, though actually somewhat subtly actually went over my head the first time I saw it, and something had to point it out to me, where Rando Yaguchi explicitly saying he hopes to rebuild the Japanese government because, well, a bit of a big thing in the movie is it drags on because of all the meetings. This is actually very deliberate because it's meant to show how they're spending more time going to meetings, pushing all the paperwork, and basically wanting to spend more time on meetings and discussing things rather than actually helping. Minus Doji is apparently about the way that war can change someone. And this doesn't really work with both Godzilla because we don't really know this Godzilla. We get a mention of him, but the first we ever see of him is actually a pretty violent, yes, territorial and somewhat investigative creature but still exceptionally violent nonetheless.
Again, also kind of a lie, because the only person that he kills is a searchlight operator, which he's not even going out of his way to directly kill the operator. He's just destroying the light. As when he continues to ponder over, he's not going out of his way to directly kill the people in the dugout. He's just sort of investigating what's going on. And he also looks at Shikishima and chooses not to kill him. So Godzilla is territorial, yes, but not bloodthirsty or hyper aggressive like he's trying to paint Minus to be. And it really is only after you see this Godzilla become mutated that he goes out of his way to directly attack things that haven't attacked him yet, as we do see with one of the other minor boats getting taken from underneath and all the people who die in Ginza as a result. Yeah, we know a lot about Minus Goji. We know his origins. We directly see him get mutated. We understand his behavior, and we know a lot about the mechanics of his atomic breath, as well as how like he has to function in the ocean. The reason why I somewhat call it a lie is because I remember we had this conversation with him before, and he was just like, I don't see it. I don't think so. Even though the text and the like what we see on screen is just not accurate to what he's claiming it to be. But in your earlier comment, you said it's hard to quantify evil like that because the impact will ultimately be determined by how much of a personal stake there is in its consequences. Not exactly. I mean, you can have a top-down understanding of it.
The first we see of him is literally someone shining a spotlight on him and just destroying the entire tower, which actually makes a few of his actions on Odo Island a bit odd. After all, why would he let Shikishima get out of the plane when the guns were trained on him, even though Godzilla wouldn't know what the force multipliers are, and then once Shikishima gets out, just flips over the plane? I understand the reason for the much more aggressive and overtly evil gods.
Actually, an easy way to make sense of that is when he goes into the plane, Godzilla doesn't know what it would be, but once he is attacked by the men in the trench and starts killing them, Godzilla can probably deduce the fact that whatever that person was in was probably something else that was also going to be able to shoot at him, and that's why he destroys the plane as well. And since Shikishima's on the ground and knocked out, Godzilla doesn't see any more reason to like stomp on him and kill him. So that it's pretty clear, and you could make a lot of inferences as to why Godzilla acts the way he does, with it being logically consistent. Lying is when you don't tell the truth, but you can spread a misinformation believing it's true. But a lie is like a willful denial and telling of information that isn't true. Like you have to have intention to lie. Like if someone tells you something and you believe it wholeheartedly with good faith, and then you say it to someone else, you yourself are not the one lying. You are spreading misinformation, and you were lied to.
Godzilla that -1 does portray, but you don't really get the sense that he changed all that much. And especially if the movie is trying to emulate the original as heavily as it is, especially with Godzilla's origin, I would say it does fall a little bit flat in making Godzilla explicitly and overtly evil while trying to evoke that original sympathetic origin.
Also, remember the fact, too, that Godzilla in the original origin would be stated by the sacrifice of young women. So whether we are to believe that the practice was completely bogus, then you have to make a lot of inferences to make that assumption. But considering the fact that the tradition would occur, like, was able to survive into the modern day, and we know for a fact Godzilla was living in the area, it is safer to assume that without a doubt Godzilla was actually doing something to these people, and as a result fishing would become better again, instead of saying that Godzilla was completely sympathetic and he's just a confused animal and his rage is not really rage.
I'd have to say, overall, for all the deviations, variations, and changes that it makes to Godzilla, Shin is actually the much more faithful version of the character with respect to the original than -1.
That makes no sense.
For even though you don't really get to see Godzilla in that classic silhouette, classic physique style for most of the movie, his origin is entirely different. By essentially doing everything differently, they arrived at almost the same composite end.
No, they don't. So dissimilar design, even though there's enough for you to be like, oh yeah, it's Godzilla, a very different Godzilla, but still Godzilla. Origins, also very different. actions very different, whereas Shin literally is very does not know what's going on and then chooses to flee when it changes because of its overheating. Godzilla went out of its way to destroy ships, went out of its way to come on the land and killed people, went back in the ocean, and then came back again a second time to inflict more injuries on Japan, returned, and then died. Shin just sort of comes back on the land for reasons that we can't really understand, and then is frozen. And then throughout that entire scene, from him coming into his fourth form, using his atomic breath, and then becoming frozen, does not emulate in any way, shape, or form the same gravity and story of the original. So to even claim that Shin is more faithful makes no sense.
A creature which does not wish to destroy, a creature that is confused and almost scared of the world it finds itself in, reacting to what it finds in a way that we can all understand, lashing out, becoming enraged, and feeling pain. A creature which simply...
Feeling pain. Like, -1 also felt pain, so I guess that makes -1 just as equally faithful as Shin. How do we account for hundreds of thousands of lives we may or may not care about as much? Like, do you feel it in your heart of hearts, care about it? Maybe not, but can you rationalize it and make sense of it? Yes. And I think that's in most cases where you can quantify it. And as a result, that's where you can get into things like these, like moral calculations of that nature. It's only an interpretation that Shin doesn't know what's going on. I argue that that's not what's happening, given he displays anger when they bomb him. Like, could it be anger? Could it be pain? Could it be a mixture of both? Definitely could be a mixture of both. I think that definitely Shin is angry that he got hit, but also probably in pain, since it's the only time we ever see blood coming out of his back like that. So I'd say it's a mixture of both, but to say it's closer to 54's actions, it may therefore more faithful, definitely not.
Wishes to live. Conversely, with -1, we get a creature that, while starting off a bit aggressive, turned into a far more aggressive, bloodthirsty creature that lives only to kill, that does not care whether or not something is responsible for what happened to it.
Neither did 54. Also, it should be noted that unlike -1, we don't get to see how the Islanders interacted or saw or carried on the legend of the pre-mutated 54 based on when Godzilla is mutated in the film, which is before the events of the film to begin with.
It will destroy it simply for existing. While it does carry many of the classic elements and does style itself much in line with the original, it misses that very crucial character nature, the sympathy and the terror for the monster. And make no mistake, I am not saying that Shin is a better Godzilla than -1 because it is more faithful. In fact, I believe it is completely impossible to make a truly, completely faithful new version of Godzilla to...
No, that also makes no sense, because if you understand what makes the original Godzilla, if you implement that into a new story, then by that very nature, yes, you can create a wholly faithful original. Like, you'd be faithful to the original Godzilla. That makes no sense.
Even just the original. A faithful adaptation of Godzilla as he is now is truly impossible. He is such a versatile character. He has come to embody so many different things.
No, he hasn't.
In fact, the characterization that they gave to something like Goji, I think would actually have been a fantastic variant of Godzilla had he not been styled so much and intended to emulate the original so heavily.
Let's go back. What he just said.
Characterization that they gave to something like Goji, I think would actually have been a fantastic variant of Godzilla had he not been styled so much and intended to emulate the original so heavily.
Yeah, emulate. So he's not the original Godzilla. It is a new take on Godzilla that closely follows the original. So that's exactly what.
He draws far more heavily on GMK, which, honestly, GMK was the first Godzilla movie I ever saw.
No, he doesn't.
Full. It's one of my favorites. But it's also a movie that doesn't try to be like the original. It fully embraces trying to do something different, and in fact, it was the first of Toho's Godzilla movies to move the character in a vastly different direction than he had ever been before. Once again,
sure, I guess. Like, it's kind of my face from most of everything. I'm just kind of sad.
You will never be able to get a completely faithful Godzilla that fully captures the old original Godzilla in its entirety, unless they do what is essentially a shot-for-shot, line-for-line remake.
Then that's also like ridiculous like standard to make, where it's like, oh, you have to do a shot for shot remake because only then would you be able to really make a faithful like a faithful version that's like faithful to the original. No, if you understand the intentions behind the character and you really analyze the scenes or the writings behind it or the statements of like the directors and the people behind it, you can make a faithful story that is coming off of the back of the original Godzilla. And they did do that in -1, did that in 84. So yeah.
Some, like Shin, do get a lot closer than others. Even without trying. Some, such as -1, get close in some ways. They evoke the feel, they evoke the look, but they miss on a few critical character points. And I understand when it came to -1, the reasons why they did this. They wanted to make a much more triumphant story at the end, a David versus Goliath, good versus evil, with the ending being as triumphant as it did. If Godzilla was as sympathetic...
If we're talking about ending, then also Shin is very different from 54 in that case, whereas we see the other secondary Godzilla things in Shin being frozen, whereas with 54 they leave it far more open-ended that another Godzilla would appear, and -1 emulates that by having Godzilla begin to regenerate, meaning that yes, even though it is technically the same monster, another Godzilla would appear.
As he was in the past, it would be a much more somber ending. Others miss by a mile because they're not trying to be anything like the original, save for a few homages, something like the Monsterverse, having a few references to Godzilla's nuclear past, but going in a vastly different direction, instead opting for a kaiju battle spectacle. And I'd say that, much like GMK, another one that has next to nothing in common. In fact, it has nothing in common with the original Godzilla's origin.
Yeah, it has nothing in common because it's a direct sequel to 54. So it's not trying to emulate the 54 B-54.
As that one is explicitly supernatural, both work because they're not trying to be like the original. They go in their own direction. The not being faithful was the point. Every version, every variant of Godzilla carries varying levels of faithfulness to the original. Even for all of its sins, Zilla does. Which we actually have
Makes no
something in the
sense.
works comparing him and minus Goji. Faithfulness
Oh, I cannot wait for that. That means another video is going to be in the pipeline, and I'm going to love that. A 98 comparison to minus.
doesn't make one Godzilla better than any other. The best Godzilla is the one that is your favorite.
Even if the story makes no sense. No, I'm sorry. I don't agree with that point at all. People are entitled to like whatever design they are, but just to say that, oh, the best one is the one you like is a non-answer.
This video actually started out a lot different than how it ended. I may actually read...
Yes. More Zim slop. My argument Shin as a modern reimagining of 54 would be now, minus as a loose remake going back to the era. I don't really agree with that.
retool a lot of the script into making another video, because a lot of the stuff I bring up in that video I do think is actually somewhat important to go over, but it doesn't really fit with this video. For me, Godzilla is Godzilla. Every different form he takes, every shape, size, I love Godzilla. Some, yes, they go a lot closer to the original than others. Some deviate very heavily. And
an apple is an apple, just like how Godzilla is a Godzilla, defining something by defining something, which therefore makes the definition pointless because you're using the thing that you're defining to define it.
I love them all the same. It is unfortunate how much the community has divided itself, and one of the reasons I get so heated about a lot of things is because I care. I want to see people be able to enjoy Godzilla and not necessarily get attacked over it. Especially with regards to the way the community kind of puddles around -1, where it is held up as this shining pinnacle example of the best version of Godzilla, when on a surface level, it does have a lot in common with the original, but the character and the content of this Godzilla is a very heavy deviation from it.
You've literally not proven this at all.
The same is also for Shin. The same is for every Godzilla other than the original. In fact, only one Godzilla since the original has come close, and that's really Kiryu. And that's because Kiryu is the original Godzilla.
That makes no sense either.
Which, side note, some of you guys have been asking me about this. Unfortunately, that video also did get copyright flagged. I know that one hurt me a lot, because that honestly was one of my favorite videos to make. I know that I've been pretty harsh on -1, and despite how harsh I am on it, it is one of my favorite Godzilla movies. I said back in the previous Monsterverse video, and I will say it again, I criticize what I love because I love it. And it does dishearten me to see that people will go and gush about something and refuse to acknowledge its failing points. That is especially true of -1. This video was actually a lot more negative on.
That would also technically mean people defending it are defending it because they care and they want things to be good because they love it. So you've not really addressed any of the problems that you've made.
-1 in terms of planning, and that original script I got rid of because a lot of that negativity was not towards the actual movie itself. They are not flaws and criticisms of -1 itself, but rather the way that the community has taken -1 and run with it as something that it realistically isn't. As unrelated as
Again, vague posting at its finest.
it may seem, it actually is because Nanashi Mume of Hololive English Generation 2 is graduating, that after that announcement, it did kind of pretty heavily hit me. And looking back, I wanted to make something that was a lot more positive. So, this one's for you. While it may capture the look of the original Godzilla, it doesn't capture the feel of it. Conversely, Shin doesn't really capture the look of the original Godzilla, but it captures the feel of it. I'll see you guys.
No, Shin really doesn't. Shin is definitely an interesting film to say the least, but it does not capture what makes the 54 Godzilla the 54 Godzilla. The best Godzilla would be 54 since it's the gold standard and bar that others have to live up to, as well as being the most faithful to the radio drama. Yeah, since technically the radio drama came first, since the radio drama is probably different from the movie, which is different from the book, there's no true quote unquote faithful, like original faithful Godzilla because of all the deviations, which makes no sense. 2000, Megaguirus, and GMK are all the original Godzilla. Well, 2000 is actually the second generation Godzilla. Megaguirus is the original Godzilla, which we do see since they impose the Miragoji onto certain 54 scenes and then recreate some wholesale, whereas GMK is the second Godzilla, but is resurrected, which you could argue is just a resurrected 54, but it is still the second Godzilla. So really only the Godzillas that are the original Godzilla from 1954 is obviously 54 itself, Godzilla versus Megaguirus, and Kiryu because it's the bones of 54, and Final Wars since there was no other Godzilla in the Final Wars continuity, and that Godzilla was spawned in the 50s as well. Shin definitely uses the original spaces, but still very new. That's part of the appeal. Well, all of them use the original as like a base, just in different ways. By the metric, yes, that would make 84 going like taking things of the original but doing it new. Same thing for 2000, Megaguirus, etc., etc., etc. Like the main crux of his video is the idea that Shin Godzilla and Godzilla 54 are far more sympathetic than they actually are shown to be in their films, and because he is able to view Shin as sympathetic and 54 as sympathetic, that is the main crux of his argument. But as we've continually talked about in this live stream, Godzilla 54, like -1, would go out of its way to attack things. And in the case of -1, the only like ships that we see minus attack are those that are military targets, like the American ships, or Japanese vessels that are directly there to engage him. Whereas at 54, it sunk 2 fishing ships, sunk a pleasure cruise, and obviously killed a lot of people on the mainland, similar to -1. So again, -1 is a far more faithful to 54 than it is to than Shin is. And actually, I have to give myself a pat on the back because we actually got through that entire video with we did not do the 2 hours, unfortunately, but it is what it is. I am actually curious, if anyone's wondering, what would be some questions that you'd have about what we've discussed, just to sort of end it off. We'll go for a few more minutes, just so we can get to about like an hour 30 some odd. I forgot to give his character's depth. I think that like as characters, Anno's characters, being the fact that they're trying to represent an issue that was coming about in the Japanese government, their actions are rooted to that issue, and I think that they are provided depth in that sense instead of like the more basic and not in a bad way, but basic in the sense of understandable character arcs and journeys and depth that you see with -1 or even any of the other Godzilla films, I would say. And since a lot of the characters are trying to embody like a certain government archetype or a certain sentiment that is shared by Japan at the time of the events that he is trying to emulate, I think that they have depth, but for different reasons than most characters do, and like what you'd expect most characters to have. Do you think that he'll try to argue the 90 is more faithful than -1? Oh, I don't think so, but I'd be very curious to see what he has to say. And I'm going to be honest, I think really the only reason why he has something like that in the pipeline is because of the fact that he really wants to give his thoughts about what he feels is the problem with the Godzilla community rather than the problem with -1 itself. And he even essentially says that. And I think, yeah, like you say right here, 90 being more sympathetic is probably one point that he will bring up. I got notes written down about Shin's characters. Can't wait to delve into them. Will be fun to see. Internet did a fucky wucky. I got to the point where he said the best Godzilla is the one you like. Yeah, well, it's essentially the same thing as saying, well, it's just all my opinion, because it's supposed to shield you from like any kind of criticism that you may have towards the video, where it's like we're just talking about opinions and ideas. It doesn't really matter, but like it matters enough for us to make these videos and discuss them. But like, why are we getting heated? Well, it's because we care about them. It's these layers of interconnectedness to like divorce yourself from like having hard conversations, but wanting to input your views on said conversations. What if the man in the suit is more faithful than -1? I wonder. I really should not read. I should probably watch The Man in the Suit and give my thoughts on it. But like, it's one of those things where I know the concept of it. I wasn't interested in it. And then I feel like now I'm only gonna look at it because it is a contentious topic because of what happened to the creator rather than general interest in the story. Because it's very much like a lot of other analog horror series, but it just so happens to involve Godzilla. And I'm like, okay. I am trusting you with the authority to determine that based on the facts you present. I trust your judgment, and you essentially give me a non-answer. Yeah. Well, you're giving them the floor to present their claims with a level of authority conviction, but essentially back down from standing behind those opinions with conviction. What about LKP Gojira? I think that what you did with your Godzilla is very faithful, and I like the direction it's gone in. And I'm also excited to collect some certain figures, which for anyone who has not subscribed to Lizard King Productions, definitely give him a follow, a like, and keep following his LKB Gojira stuff, because he just did one on Rodan and Radon. It's very cool to see. And I'm disappointed in myself because if I had followed my schedule, I would have had my Rodan video done around the same time, but it is what it is. Yeah, if Godzilla represents anything, then he can represent my early onset dementia. Zim, are you participating in that OC Kaiju April thing? I'm going to try to. I probably will not be able to participate in it because I just have so much going on. But my monster Necron is a monster that is appearing in the Kaiju April. I forget which day he is on, but I'm happy that my boy made it in. I'll post that in general chat, in general art chat for anyone who's interested in what that monster is, but also I'll probably post that on my Instagram as well, probably tomorrow. Godzilla represents Sim and Brayden's marriage. Yeah, exactly. I saw that your mother. The plot of that story is falling apart, much like your marriage. Yeah, well, much like my marriage. I'll tell you that much. Is there a Kaiju April? Yeah, well, I'll Alligator. I'll show him on screen because he set up the last one, which had Zogura in it, and now he's doing a new one, which has Necron in it. So let me go find Zalad. There we go. And then I can pull up. I might do a new Necron drawing, but I probably will not be able to actually like participate in full, unfortunately, as much as I would want to. So you missed a lot, Martin. We finished the rest of the video, and the conclusion was very lacking, unfortunately. But that is what it is when you don't really want to commit to your points and essentially just mass them all in. Bro, it's just my opinion. Don't you understand? Cut. Not what I'm looking for. And also not what I'm looking for. Oh, did I not put it in my Google Drive? Oh, well. Is what it is. In that case, I will show the picture here at least. Screen. Yep. So this is the Kaiju April that they have here. And a lot of people that I recognize, like I recognize him, obviously Oliver himself, to Sketch, Poland, Alligator, Tyler, I recognize, Creator, I know, same with Daco, but there is Necron right there, and Jagera I also recognize as well. But let me see, because that showed the entire thing. I just want to show off my monster. Why won't you let me? Oh well. Well, you'll see it on the Instagram probably. I'm also currently working on Gore Stories for the Speculative Kaiju series I'm working on. Is he on Instagram? Yes, he is, as you just saw. Do you know maybe Free for the Doom podcast? I haven't checked the date on that yet. I've just been, again, super busy day. And I'll make these probably the last two questions I'll answer before I head off. So what do you think of GXK3 working title being Zeus? It could be interesting because that means like either they're going to tie it to the idea of like Zeus, the mythological character, or it could be the name of something, maybe a mech. Although the thing about the mech was posted today and we know anything today, you don't want to believe it. Just like this video. But I don't know what to think until like I see more, unfortunately. I love how there's a bunch of times with unique names and really cool pronunciations, and on top of that, there's just one called Kai. What? Can't go wrong, Kai. Kai's a good name. I'll make this the last one. Okay. What are your thoughts on Twitter not calling it that? The AI, the Ghibli thing. Okay. So we'll make the last thing a non-Godzilla related topic. So when it comes to the whole AI Ghibli thing, like it's literally just in good fun. It is a trend like anything else. And once it stops being fun and becomes oversaturated, people are going to forget about it, just like they did with all the other AI stuff that has happened before. And as much of a tool as AI can be, it is not going to replace real artists. There's nothing that artists have to worry about unless you can like directly prove that the AI has been used to train on your material when you don't want it to, or things of that nature. That's obvious. But yeah, the Ghibli stuff is all in good fun. Don't overreact to it, and it will go away like any other trend. That is my diagnosis on it. Just like steamed hams on you, like the steam ham thing. People still talk about it, but most people don't. It's gonna go away. It is what it is. But I thank you all for the people who are joining me across the multiple platforms and just joining the Discord, all those wonderful things. And you know where to find me, Zimzilla99. Just add an OG underscore in front of it for Twitter, add a YT behind it for PlayStation, and pretty much just Zimzilla99 everywhere else across all the platforms. And stay tuned because I'm going to be doing some more work on the Rodan video tomorrow, and I'm going to be recording another Godzilla Unscripted, which hopefully will come out in April. And then in May is when the next part of the 98 Comprehensive Retrospective will be coming out. So stay tuned for all of those. And just remember, guys.
Semper Fi, motherfucker.